of the incoming president. Soak that in, an entirely different U.S. Capitol today. President flanked by an honor guard of Capitol Police. President-elect. They were holding off rioters. He'll be escorted inside now before he emerges on the west front for the actual ceremony. Mary Bruce up there on Capitol Hill. The contrast is so stark.
George, I cannot tell you how astounding it is here to overlook the west front of the Capitol, the exact spot where just 2 weeks ago, rioters, violent supporters of President Trump were scaling the scaffolding that has now been replaced with bunting. It is remarkable also to see so many of those who had backed the president in this effort, like Senator Ted Cruz, who just a moment ago was snapping selfies. The turnaround is astounding. And, on top of all of that, I think we should say that out here on the West Front, you have started to feel a little bit of that celebratory mood. The band is playing, members of Congress of both parties are mingling, chatting, catching up with each other. And it has been lost, I think, a little bit in the weight of the moment that is facing our country, that this is supposed to be a joyous occasion. Inaugurations are usually in part a big party. That has been denied in many ways, the Biden team. They were denied a traditional campaign because of the pandemic, and now because of the horrific violence that we have seen, much of course, the trappings of a normal inauguration are gone as well. But it is a day for the Biden team to celebrate, a moment that for Joe Biden is the culmination of 5 decades of service in politics, 3 runs at the presidency. I think about what Kamala Harris said earlier this week when she was asked about the security surrounding all of this, and she just said, look, no one's going to deny her this moment. She's going to walk out here onto this stage with her head held high, her shoulders back, soak this all in. But George, you have to wonder, what was Joe Biden thinking on that lone ride up to the Capitol through the empty streets of Washington? At the heart of it, he is a people person after all. He hasn't been able to interact much with Americans throughout this campaign. Of course, they are not here able to celebrate this moment with him now, and just a chance for Joe Biden also to take in the gravity of this moment. We saw that yesterday as he left his beloved home state of Delaware, very emotional, tearful, and it seemed the moment really hit him that he was going to be leaving Delaware for the last time as president-elect, that his life going forward was going to be forever changed.
Thank you, Mary. And Cecilia Vega will be covering the Biden White House. He's going to have to strike that balance today between speaking to the divisions out there in the country and inspiring hope.
And that will be his message, George. It's going to be a forward-looking message. I don't think you're going to get a lot of references to President Trump or necessarily the last 4 years. Certainly, he will be talking about COVID and how our nation grapples with that. But to Mary's point, this is such a long time coming for Joe Biden. He's served in the Senate for 36 years. He's tried twice to win this office and lost until the third time's a charm, his friends say. And again, we can't forget what a brutal campaign this was, including against his now soon to be vice president and how hard fought that was, and as he's taking office in the middle of a pandemic following an insurrection. But this was a lifelong goal. He tells this story about visiting his old Catholic school, and a student asked him if he always wanted to become president, and he demurred, but it was a nun who was in the back of the classroom who pulled out of her habit a letter that little Joey wrote that said he wanted to be president when he was just a young boy. And he'd been asked when he was on the campaign trail if he really wanted to hear the commander-in-chief played for him one day at some point in his life. And he said, it's not about that for him. And his friends have told me this coming into today. It's not about the pomp and circumstance of the office. He genuinely believes that he had to do this after Charlottesville, that 4 more years of a Donald Trump presidency would have been too much for this country to handle, and he is doing this as a public service, as part of who he is. Again, that golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, and that's what's inspiring his address here today, George.
Thank you, Cecilia. Like Richard Nixon, he won on his 3rd try. Rachel Scott, also at the Capitol today.
Yeah, and George, we just saw the families enter, and this is a striking image, a different image, a second family like we have never seen before, a blended family of different heritages, of different religions, Jewish and Indian. Their wedding, Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff celebrated both of their heritages. And it's striking also to see just how different this scene is playing out here on the Capitol steps. I was here just 2 weeks ago when that violent mob stormed the Capitol from all sides. And today what we saw was bipartisanship. We saw Democrats and Republicans walk through the same door together. As I saw Joe Biden walk up those steps today, it struck me that it was 48 years to the day when the election was projected for him, 48 years to the day that he won his first Senate race. He would go on to serve in the Senate for 36 years, and his long career in public service spanned 8 presidents. He will now become one of them. And history at his side today, Kamala Harris with him becoming the first woman of color to serve as vice president of the United States. I interviewed her several times on the campaign trail, and she often talked about the burden that women of color carry in this country to get people to see them in positions where they have never been seen before. And today, it will be little girls that will look up today and see her as the next vice president of the United States, George.
Thank you, Rachel. One of the other things they're going to see when she is escorted out is she's going to be escorted by Gene Goodman. He's a Capitol police officer. You might have remembered seeing the images of him from 2 weeks ago where he was being beaten down by that mob of rioters. Today, he's going to be escorting the future vice president of the United States. I want to bring in Leah Wright-Rigueur on that. Leah.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful image, and it's a powerful contrast to those images that we saw 2 weeks ago, where we saw Eugene Goodman essentially preventing the overthrow of American democracy. And now we see him escorting,
right there.
the vice president of the United States. And that's important.
And it's so hard to get those images out of our mind, to see these Capitol police officers overrun. Again, just 2 weeks ago, there's Steve Scalise, the Republican whip in the House right now. The members of Congress starting to fill up the Capitol steps. At this point, John Thune as well, Republican senator. This ceremony will symbolize recovery from those events of 2 weeks ago as well. Terry Moran, now they have to get to work.
They do, and it's the challenges are huge. We've talked about the challenge of unifying the country, as we've just seen that Capitol surrounded by a ring of armor and steel, and that is because of the division that he has set out to try to heal. And there's a problem with it because it's about the people that storm that Capitol aren't really believing in anything that's real. That Donald Trump is still their president. Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted that out today. That is an incredible challenge, that there are 2 different realities, not a fight over values or policies, but a fight over facts themselves. And that's the first thing.
And that's what makes the inaugural speech such a challenge, such an additional challenge right now. So I want to bring Michael Waldman back in on that. I think it was Ted Sorensen, John Kennedy's celebrated speechwriter, who said the deeper the divisions in the country, the more conciliatory the inaugural address must be. Do you buy that?
I do think that's right, in the sense that an inaugural address can be a time when the hokiest of political sentiments suddenly take on significant meaning, where speaking about the Constitution, as Donald Trump, I should note, did not in his inaugural address, speaking about our democracy, the language that Joe Biden used during the campaign about the soul of America, those things can be kind of corny outside of the context, but they can help begin to forge a path forward when they're spoken by a new president at a time of division.
How does he balance the poetry and the prose today, do you think?
Well, you know, it's a mistake that people make sometimes to think these are just gauzy poetry. Every great inaugural, every significant inaugural has had some part of it that was a policy. When Franklin Roosevelt talked about the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he was talking about the bank panics. And here we've got 400,000 of our fellow Americans dead in the pandemic, and action that he is pledging to take. We have a demand for racial justice and action he is pledging to take. And I think also a need to reaffirm the very basics of our democracy and the power of the vote, which was put to such important display in this election.
And there you see Senator Pat Leahy, senior Democrat. This is the Democratic leadership now coming out. Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, as well as they make their way for the president. As you see, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer there as well. I want to bring in Deborah Roberts. Deborah, I know you've been talking to voters around the country. What do they want to hear from the incoming president?
Well, George, you know, so many people are going to be hanging on to every word, I think, of Joe Biden's today when he's sworn in, because as you all have been talking about this speech, words will really matter. And we know that words have mattered in a very negative way over the last few weeks. But I think people are going to be really, really listening to hear what Joe Biden is going to say in terms of reaching out to those who didn't vote for him. When he made his acceptance speech many weeks ago, back in November, there were people who said, Republican friends of mine who said they were really touched by the way he reached out, by the way he talked about wanting to govern all America, being the president for all of America. And a friend of mine who was a Republican said to me, you know, that's not the man I voted for, but that's the man I think America needs right now. So I think he's got to sort of really make that same kind of effort today, and maybe he will touch some of these people who might be open to trying to give this a chance and see where we go.
Thank you, Deborah. I want to bring in Martha Raddatz on this as well. You wear two hats, Martha. You spent a lot of time over the last year speaking with voters across the country during this campaign, particularly Trump voters. You're also our chief global affairs anchor. So talk about both. What do Republicans, Trump supporters need to hear from this new president? What does the world need and expect to hear?
I think those Republicans who will listen to Joe Biden and those Republicans who feel he will be the next president of the United States need to hear some sort of inclusion. They need to be touched in that way, because I think this division in the Republican Party is unlike any other we have ever seen. Donald Trump was such a powerful, almost cult-like figure to so many. Those people who voted for him. I've talked to some of the Trump voters who I talked to across the nation. They're not listening today. Others will. Others want to move on. Others want to hear what he has to say. But now they feel like they are on the outs, that no one will listen to them. And I think that is such an important message. You know, I look at this Capitol today, and I look at that beautiful arch with the red bunting. That is where those protesters came 2 weeks ago, those rioters who stormed the Capitol. That very same doorway Donald Trump walked out of 4 years ago. It is really a bookend legacy for him. He walked out of that door. Joe Biden will walk out of that door. But this is a new chapter. And in so many ways, you think this inauguration was certainly marred by those events, but it also makes it so much more profound that you can turn the page. It's inspiring what has happened in those 2 weeks. You look at Eugene Goodman, who was walking up there, who steered some of those rioters away from the Senate gallery and quick thinking. You look at those military bands, this ceremony. I'm a total sucker for those military bands. But the rest of the world will also see a new chapter. They will see that democracy survived. They will know that Joe Biden will take on a new agenda, and there are people who will agree with that and who will not agree with that. I'm sure North Korea is not too happy that they lost their friend in the White House, but he will have challenges. But the world knows that a page is turning today, George.
Thank you, Martha. Sarah Fagan, you worked for a president who was coming into times nothing like this. The turmoil wasn't nearly as bad, but George W. Bush became president after a disputed election back in 2001. He knew there was great division. There were great protests in the streets. Talk about how you all thought about that address.
Well, we knew that it was an important point for him to bring the country together, and really his best opportunity to bring the country together. It's the speech that most Americans will tune into. I was really struck in getting prepared for today, thinking the parallels. Yes, the divisions are stronger, but many Democrats boycotted the inaugural, like some Republicans are doing today.
You see former Vice President Dan Quayle, go on.
Yeah, the protests were significant. The security was significant. But one big difference, Al Gore, despite having felt extremely cheated by the Supreme Court, showed up on that podium. And that was a very important moment for the country, and it showed the class that Al Gore displayed that day. And we're not going to see that by the president. We will see it by Mike Pence, which I think the vice president today is not about politics, but he is helping himself politically a great deal. Short term in the Republican Party, perhaps not, but long term, he's doing the right thing for the country.
Thank you, Sarah. We just saw, as I said, the former Vice President Dan Quayle arrive. The former Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, also arrived earlier, all saying he wanted to support the institutions. You see Senator Susan Collins right there as well. She will have a tough choice along with other Republican senators on whether or not to convict President Trump, as that second impeachment trial is likely to begin within days of this inauguration. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has still not said, Mary Bruce, let me bring you in on this, when she's going to send over that article of impeachment. The one thing we know is she wants to get through this inaugural address first.
Yeah, look, they're well aware that you have these two monumentous things colliding. Joe Biden trying to get to work, eager to show the nation that he can get to work on his agenda at the exact same time that Washington and Congress is likely to be consumed with the Senate trial of President Trump. Now, we know Biden and Mitch McConnell had been discussing, how to share the day, essentially, if there's a way so that Biden can get some work on his agenda done, get Congress to consider his nominees, for instance, and then in the afternoons hold the Senate trial. But of course, starting this afternoon, Chuck Schumer will be in charge of the Senate, Democrats taking control of Congress. The question then becomes, when will Nancy Pelosi send over the articles of impeachment? We do expect that could happen as soon as later this week. That then kicks off the Senate trial immediately, essentially. And so Washington is now going to see another thing that we have never seen before in our nation's history, not just the impeachment trial of a former president, but happening at the exact same time as Joe Biden is desperately trying to get this country to move on. It is just remarkable.
And there we see former President Clinton, former Secretary of State and Senator Hillary Clinton now coming as well. Neither played a huge role in the Biden campaign. Both spoke, but briefly, at the convention. David Muir has to be a bit bittersweet moment for Secretary Clinton. Of course, she won the popular vote 4 years ago, did not become president. So both bittersweet, bitter, and then a reminder of that day, but sweet, some sort of vindication.
You would have to think, George, but she's been very careful with her words, particularly in the last couple of weeks since those deadly riots at the Capitol. But we all remember the scene 4 years ago when she showed up after having won the popular vote and she witnessed the inauguration of Donald Trump, something we're not seeing from him today for Joe Biden.
And here comes the ruffles and flourishes. Lindsay Davis, Kamala Harris is going to have a great first duty when she is vice president this afternoon. She will swear in those new Democratic senators.
Right. And, it's interesting that she'll also be sworn in by Sonia Sotomayor, of course, the first Latino on the Supreme Court and a third female to join the Supreme Court. Not all that long ago, George, this moment seemed unimaginable, really, when we're talking about Kamala Harris becoming vice president. And in 1976, Carol Simpson, former ABC News anchor, she interviewed Barbara Jordan, Congresswoman, an ambitious black female politician in her own right. We'll come back to, go ahead and continue. Okay. And she asked Barbara Jordan at that time, do you think that this country is ready for a black female vice president? At the time, Jordan quickly said no, she didn't think that this country was ready, but she said, I'm going to help them to get ready. And now, ready or not, here she comes. Kamala, of course, means lotus flower, which is a symbol of significance in Indian culture. And the lotus grows underwater. It's a flower, though, that rises above the surface, and yet the roots remain deeply embedded in the river bottom.
And now we see George W. and Laura Bush approaching as well. President Obama, President Clinton, President Bush will all accompany Joe Biden to Arlington Cemetery this afternoon, a show of unity. President Carter wanted to be there, sends his regrets. Of course, he's 96 years old. He and Rosalind could not make it to Washington today. Byron Pitts, that's going to be an important moment to see those three presidents accompany the new president to Arlington Cemetery, saying something important about where our country is right now, the unity that remains beneath the surface of this great division we also see.
George, that's right. I mean, unity is a big part of the theme today, and seeing those images will be important. And looking at the former presidents, it reminds me that being president is about the future, right? We see President Obama there as he comes in.
President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama. Probably could not have imagined this moment either. But he worked hard to make it happen. Both he and the First Lady in the final days and weeks of the campaign, going across the country to make sure
George W. Bush,
Joe Biden get elected. Here comes President Bush. Chris Christie, as we see him come down, I'm smiling to myself as I remember that his reaction to President Trump's inaugural 4 years ago.
Yeah, it was vintage President Bush 43. And you know, the interesting thing is there's our last Republican president who showed how he handled himself in his post-presidency life. Went back to Dallas, lives at the end of a cul-de-sac in a very normal-looking house, and went to painting and to supporting his presidential center. And I think one of the real challenges now for Donald Trump, given his vast difference in personality to George W. Bush, is what does he do with himself now? And I think it's going to be a challenge for him to decide once again whether he has to make himself the center of everything or whether he wants to become part of that group that is
on that
on the
point,
stage.
George W. Bush barely seen it all in public over the last years, except for his causes, very specific causes.
And but when that Saturday after the election, when all the races were called, it was President George W. Bush who put out a statement congratulating President-elect Biden and calling President-elect Biden to congratulate him. What he understands is the role of a statesman.
And he put out that statement after the siege of the Capitol as well. President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama. Cecilia Vega, Barack Obama chose Joe Biden as his vice president. He trusted Joe Biden as his vice president. He writes about being irritated at times by Joe Biden as vice president, but in the end, they became brothers.
They are indeed brothers to this day, George. And David mentioned earlier that Joe Biden had initially said he didn't want to be vice president to Barack Obama. Ultimately, it was his mother who said, come on, basically, what are you doing? But yeah, in Joe Biden's memoirs, he said that he felt often that Obama, I'm paraphrasing here, was too heady, that he thought about things so much that he was deliberate to a fault. And others in the Obama circle have said that, Joe Biden has a tendency to be long-winded. He likes to talk, and that he could often kind of go into left field. And when President Obama was deliberate in talking about line A, Joe Biden would come in and say, hey, but Mr. President, what about Z? And sort of veer these conversations off course. And frankly, Joe Biden felt like he wasn't. Oh, I'm going to let you go, George.
Well, yeah, there you see the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, Sonia Sotomayor, Justice Sonia Sotomayor as well. Chief Justice, of course, will be administering the oath to Joe Biden. Back when Barack Obama was inaugurated, they got the oath wrong. They had to redo it the next day. I'm sure he will not make that mistake again. He carries the card with him all the time at this point. Rahm Emanuel, you saw the relationship between Joe Biden and Barack Obama up close as White House Chief of Staff. Tell us a little more about it.
I described it as a head and a heart. I mean, it was just touched on. President Obama was meticulous to a point. You could tell, I mean, he was very cerebral and very intellectual. And Joe Biden was a candidate that, was a person also by hand touch and by in that effort. And he was so emotional about things. And it tells a little story about his own life. So I always refer to the relationship as one of head and one of heart. On the other hand, it was a perfect team. And if it was complete in that sense. And it was like everything else. I will say a lot of times presidencies and vice presidencies have some competition. That's just, to be honest, as a vice president starts to look on, you're talking about change. You want somebody who's loyal to you. I do think in this sense that they had a great friendship that ended with a great friendship.
There you see Cole and Ella Emhoff. Of course, they are the children of Doug Emhoff, now the second gentleman of the United States, husband of Kamala Harris. John, Carl, talk more about that relationship as well. You saw it, you covered both White Houses.
Absolutely. One thing I thought watching George W. Bush walk down, followed by watching Barack Obama walk down, when Obama had to hand off the reins to Donald Trump, what he told his staff is that he wanted to follow the George W. Bush model of transitions. George W. Bush did everything he could to make a smooth transition for Barack Obama, gracious, and that's exactly what, even under those extraordinary circumstances following the 2016 election, handing off power to somebody who denied that he was even an American citizen and a legitimate president. Even so, Barack Obama opened up his White House to the new Trump team and told his top advisors that we are going to follow the Bush model. We are going to have a smooth transition.
There you see the Biden children, Hunter and Ashley Biden, are coming as well. Of course, Hunter was at the center of this campaign, under fire during the first impeachment trial of President Trump as he tried to make an issue of Hunter Biden's business dealings in Ukraine. Joe Biden, Cecilia Vega never walked away from the son he loved.
Oh, it's so much a part of who he is, you know, and it's not lost that Beau Biden was 46 when he died, and Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States, and it's still the one topic that brings him to tears, that he really gets emotional about it. And he said, he's told people leading up to today that he believes that it could have been his son taking this oath of office today. And also, George, just quickly, I was struck by seeing Doug Emhoff's children walk in. You know, they call Kamala Harris Mamala. These are her children. This is their family. That when they were introduced to her for the first time, she was wearing her Chucks. That this is, you know, that they talk about her as being just the mom, the woman in Chucks that they know, and yet they're still kind of weirded out by seeing their dad on television, on CNN, doing interviews. And of course, he is a lawyer and will be entering Georgetown Law School to teach there when they make the move here today to Washington.
Lindsay Davis, they met on a blind date. She Googled him beforehand. But I love the anecdote I was reading just a couple days ago. His first wife went to dinner with the two of them and said, "You made him a better man."
And she says that they have a great relationship. And her friend, by the way, had told her, don't Google him before that blind date. I did want to just point out the fashion, because we saw obviously Hillary Clinton coming out in her purple pantsuit. Kamala Harris opting not to follow that fashion trend today. She is wearing a dress designed by Christopher John Rogers and Sergio Hudson. Christopher is a young black designer from Baton Rouge, currently lives in New York City. Sergio is a black designer from South Carolina. And Joe Biden wearing perhaps the most iconic American designer, Ralph Lauren, who had also dressed Hillary Clinton and Melania Trump in 2017. Also, the second gentleman wearing a Ralph Lauren suit as well. And Dr. Jill Biden is wearing a blue wool tweed coat and dressed by emerging designer Alexandra O'Neill of Markarian, and very intentionally hand embellished by crystals and pearls to subtly reflect the light. I imagine that is meant both literally and figuratively.
He was talking about that yesterday, and there, of course, you see the current Vice President of the United States for another hour or so, Mike Pence, and his wife, Karen Pence. John Carl, I think there was never any question, really, whether Mike Pence would show up today. Deep down, he is an institutionalist as well.
No question at all. He was going to be at this inauguration no matter what. He was a Trump loyalist, but he is an institutionalist. He took this role as vice president seriously, and part of the way he saw it was loyalty to the president, but more importantly, loyalty to the Constitution and loyalty to the traditions, American political traditions, and that's why he's here.
Mary Alice Parks, pick up on this as well. We were talking about where he fits in the Republican Party going forward, if at all, how the Republican Party moves beyond Trump.
You know, we were talking about seeing Senator Ted Cruz, and I don't think that Democrats view this impeachment as the only moment of possible repercussions for what happened with that riot. I think that they are dealing with the impeachment, but they have talked a lot about whether there should be serious repercussions for some of those senators that were engaged in perpetuating bogus claims about the election. And, you know, George Bush, too, in his statement about the insurrection, he said he was deeply disappointed with political leaders who were, again, just questioning a valid and fair election. So I think that this idea of consequences or of accountability does not stop with the outgoing president. But we're going to see a continued conversation about the future of some of those Republicans who want to continue to have a seat at the table in Congress.
You know, you have people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, former United States Supreme Court clerks, people who know the law and know the Constitution, who knowingly lied to angry and desperate people who had voted for the president, and they knowingly lied to them. That's what they did. They knew there was no way for Mike Pence to do anything on January 6th, and there needs to be acknowledged that that happened for two reasons. Because they were pursuing their own ambition, and they weren't doing a thing to try to help Donald Trump because they knew they couldn't.
He also had a solid majority of the House Republican caucus vote that way as well. The ceremony, boy, it's just hard as you look at it right now and you see all those masks. I'm going to bring Jen Ashton back on this. What a sign of the times.
Absolutely, George. We have to remember it was just about 9 months ago that we heard the CDC do an about face and say that they're recommending face coverings for all lay people. We've never seen that before, and to see it now in the setting of unprecedented deaths and an out-of-control pandemic and an inauguration is just really historic.
You see double masks there at times as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're starting to see that recommendation as well with possibly an N95 on the inner layer and another outer layer. Some aerosol scientists saying that it does offer more protection.
And now,
ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Michael R. Pence and Mrs. Karen Pence.
Vice President Pence making his way out. You hear that applause there. He was leaving office as governor of Indiana when Donald Trump chose him to be vice president, resurrected his career at that time, paid him back with loyalty over 4 years. Some would say to a fault, but a final break at the end. Mary Bruce, we're talking about signs of the times, not only masks on the faces of all those people on the steps today, many members of Congress wearing body armor.
George, just astounding and certainly a sign of the times. Some Democratic members are, we've learned, wearing body armor out here today underneath their coats. In fact, our reporter Ben Siegel spotted some Democrats greeting each other by sort of tapping on their chest, sort of a subtle acknowledgement that they are prepared. Because, of course, it was just 2 weeks ago. It's not just that they witnessed, this horrific violence. They were victims of it. So many who are here today to mark this transfer of power were themselves whisked away off of the Senate or House floor into a secure location. And so many members of Congress, like the rest of the country, are still reeling from this, but in a very personal way. And I have to say, on a very different note, it is just remarkable here. It's always one of my sort of favorite parts of an inauguration is just to watch former presidents and congressional leaders pal around. I have to say, President Bush, as he often does at these things, appears to be having a pretty good time. It's just fun to be able to see all of them interact, the children, the grandchildren. We saw Joe Biden's granddaughters there. He is so incredibly close with them. They talk all day pretty much in one never-ending constant conversation there. They are, along with the youngest Biden there, Hunter Biden's baby son. But it is just such a split screen to think that you have, so many coming together to mark really this next chapter at the same time that so many are still coming to terms and grappling with what we saw here just 2 weeks ago.
That's right, Mary. And I want to bring in Pierre Thomas for more on that, because Pierre, every single day that goes by, we learn how much more horrifying it was inside that Capitol, inside those chambers. Members of Congress could have lost their lives.
Indeed, George. Law enforcement officials saying that members of Congress could have been kidnapped. Some of them could have been killed. I've been on the phone with sources all morning. They're talking about that every stop has been pulled. They are not taking any chances. I'm not surprised that members of Congress are wearing body armor. And George, a couple of the law enforcement officials that I spoke to, including those officers who were in the melee, talked about how while there was a major security breach, they are saying that they believe that they fought to save democracy, that they fought to save democracy. They have no doubt that the people that would storm that Capitol were coming in to take hostages and possibly kill people. And one of the officers talked about how many of the people in the crowd were trying to turn them against members of Congress, trying to get them to help them arrest members of Congress. Just extraordinary. But they're watching with a lot of pride today, George, because they believe that they helped keep the unimaginable from happening.
Right. This was not just spontaneous combustion. There were a lot of elements of pre-planning here, Pierre.
Indeed, George. We are getting information that some of those charged had talked about coming to D.C. days earlier before the January 6th certification of Biden's election to do, quote, hunting. Law enforcement officials put out a statement through court documents yesterday that members of these groups were communicating during the actual attack, communicating through Facebook messaging, talking about trapping members of Congress. Just extraordinary. And my sources are saying that the more we learn about this and how challenging the situation was for law enforcement, fist fights throughout the Capitol, George. One of the officers talked about how they were in a hall full of basically smoke and tear gas, and that the crowd was coming down the hall, and there were about 15 officers who fought back over 100 people. And he said at that point he was dragged out the door, and he was stripped of his badge. He was stripped of his ammunition. And they were yelling, kill him with his own gun. Incredible, George.
Alex Rodriguez right there, I believe. Help him. Yeah. Right. And Jennifer Lopez, of course, is going to be singing here at the inaugural. Martha Raddatz, I assume, I hope at least, the 25,000 National Guards troops are going to deter and defend against any attack today. But again, talking about signs of the times, one of the chilling ones, all those National Guard troops had to be screened for an insider threat.
They were all vetted, and in fact, George, some of them have been kicked out. 2 members, they said, because of extremist statements that were found, and about a dozen others because of criminal background or criminal activity not related to extremism. But that has been a problem in the military over the years. They have fought to get white supremacists out and extremists out. I know they're going to double down on that going forward. But 25,000 National Guard members, again, these are citizen soldiers. This is not their full-time job. They can be nurses, they can be hairdressers, they can be anything, and they were all called to duty. I think you just saw Eugene Goodman going by there. They were all called to duty after January 6th. There was a very mild presence of National Guard on January 6th. They didn't want them to be in tactical gear. The mayor of D.C. did not want that look, but now they've got 25,000. And I'll tell you also, George, there are all these ceremonial military there. It's wonderful to look at those bands. There will be many more ceremonies as the day goes on, but there are seen and unseen military officers ready to respond to any kind of threat today.
And there we see Kamala Harris, Doug Emhoff, making their way down the Capitol steps. Byron, you said this means an awful lot to people like your daughters who look like her.
George, that's absolutely right. I mean, there is the power of possibility when you see someone who looks like you. Black or white, we as a nation celebrate first. We see it as progress, not a problem. Certainly some in the shadows of America fear diversity. But this day, these images, George, remind us this time, fear did not win.
Kamala Harris will make history just about an hour from now. As we see Pete Buttigieg is going to be incoming Secretary of Transportation, along with his husband, Chasten. 2 vice presidents talking there, Dan Quayle and Mike Pence, greeted now by Bill Clinton.
Accompanying the Vice President-elect, the Chief of Inaugural Ceremonies, Maria Miller-Lohmeyer, the Acting Deputy House Sergeant-at-Arms, Kevin Grubbs, and the Acting Deputy Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, United States Capitol Police Officer, Private First Class Eugene O. Goodman.
Jean Goodman, Capitol Police officer, under assault 2 weeks ago, now escorting the Vice President-elect.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President-elect of the United States, Kamala Devi Harris, and Mr. Douglas Imhoff.
Lindsay Davis, you can see it in her eyes. She's smiling.
You can see it. Her eyes are smiling. She got her pearls on as well. You know, her Secret Service code name is Pioneer, and that is just how so many see her. Of course, first woman district attorney in San Francisco, first woman attorney general in California, only the second black woman to become a U.S. senator, and all this just as a reminder from a woman who was born at a time when all black women in this country still could not vote. And so certainly this is a real moment. Of course, she just gave a fist bump to former President Barack Obama. And I would imagine you were talking about the young girls, and I'd like to use Kamala's own words. So she said in the past that they see themselves in a way that others may not, simply because they've never seen it before. And as I imagine, as a result of this moment, that the young women and girls everywhere are going to dream a bit bigger and perhaps expect just a little more.
Hugs there for her stepchildren. David Muir, Doug Emhoff is going to carve out a new role we've never seen before, second gentleman.
And he helped choose what he would be called. Second gentleman was, of course, on the list of possibilities. He's comfortable with that. So we will call him the second gentleman. He's given up his post in a prestigious law firm out west. He will now teach at Georgetown, as Cecilia mentioned earlier in our coverage here. And his children have talked in recent days about how they call their own father, their dad, Doug. They said they're so comfortable with him and who he is that they also call him Doug in the household. And they said, our parents have such a relationship. They've been married 6 years or so now, that is so connected, so tight, so close that it weirds us out in so many words. The sort of romance that's still alive, they say, between Doug and the Vice President-elect. But they support Mamala, as they call her, and it's a very close relationship, a very modern family. Kamala Harris very close to their mother. And as you mentioned, George, earlier, they've all had dinner together. Kamala Harris telling me when she was running for president that she is all about people knowing that she hears them, she sees them. She repeated that when she was chosen by Joe Biden. And one of the key things as we head into this historic day is not only is she the first woman to be vice president, as Byron said, children, young daughters, and sons all over America are now learning in real time what's possible in America. She says she hopes to play the same role for Joe Biden that he played for Barack Obama, to be the last person in the room, a willingness to be honest with him, to tell her what she believes, but also knowing that ultimately the choice will be his.
Thank you, David. Rachel Scott, one of the fun things about these inaugurations, about these early days of new administrations, is all the new people you meet.
Mm-hmm. It is, George, and you could see Kamala Harris there taking in this moment, the daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, standing there ready to take the oath in a Capitol where she once interned, just miles away from Howard University, the historically black college where she graduated, where she joined Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Here on the grounds of the United States Capitol, a symbol of democracy that was built by slaves. This is her moment today as well. And when she was first elected district attorney of San Francisco, the first black woman to do so, she said she walked into her office and it was completely empty except for just one chair in the middle. But George, she was so happy to be able to take her seat.
The Honorable Nancy Pelosi.
And now we're the president-elect making his way
accompanying
through the crypt into the vestibule,
and Mr. John Bessler. Staff Representative Stephanie Hager
for what will be the capstone
Majority Leader, the Honorable
of an incredible political career.
L. Chow, and Staff Representative
Began with election to Newcastle County Council more than 50 years ago. Elected the youngest senator back in 1972. He will take the oath as the oldest president in 2021. There with Dr. Joe Biden. He'll be looking out over a mall that is so different from most inaugurals. As we've been saying, an empty mall, a mall empty of people, filled only with flags. Representing the Americans who can't be there, the Americans we lost over this last year to the pandemic. That is top of his mind, top of his agenda. Starting in about 45 minutes from now, when he will become president of the United States. If you saw the smile behind Kamala Harris's eyes, you see the sense of responsibility, I think, behind Joe Biden's eyes right now. He knows the challenges he's facing. He knows the divisions he must heal. And the first step will be when he addresses the country after taking the oath. Starting to snow a little bit there in Washington. As you see Amy Klobuchar, she's leading the proceedings for the Democrats today, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Ladies and gentlemen, accompanying the president-elect, the staff director of the Joint Congressional Committee and Inaugural Ceremonies,
and that was Hunter Biden
Fitzhugh Elder IV,
and his baby, named after
House Senate Sergeant at Arms,
his late brother,
Tim
Bo.
Blodgett, and the acting Senate Sergeant at Arms, Jennifer Hemingway.
Here comes the escort committee. Terry Moran notices this escort committee, everybody from the Sergeant at Arms office is acting. That's, of course, because the Sergeant at Arms were relieved of their duty after the siege of the Capitol.
Because of that catastrophe in preparation and support of the law enforcement mission there to protect that Capitol. And as you've hinted, what we're seeing is the reclaiming of that hallowed ground in our country, from that violent mob back to the proper representatives of the people's democracy. They said it's our house. No, it's actually all our house, and there's a way to get there.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden.
The step's not as full as normal, but the feeling is there. You saw that fist bump between President Obama, his Vice President Joe Biden, now President-elect, soon to be president. Taking in that moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
We will now hear from Senator Amy Klobuchar. She will be the first to welcome that somewhat more sparse inaugural crowd today.
Please welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Vice President Pence, Mr. President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, members of Congress and the judicial branch, former presidents and first ladies, vice presidents, leaders from abroad, and a whole bunch of Bidens. America, welcome to the 59th presidential inauguration, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take their solemn oaths. This ceremony is the culmination of 244 years of a democracy. It is the moment when leaders brought to the stage by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish it and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, guardians of our country. Have we become too jaded, too accustomed to the ritual of the passing of the torch of democracy to truly appreciate what a blessing and a privilege it is to witness this moment? I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does, goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a sacred trust between our leaders and our people takes place in front of this shining Capitol dome for a reason. When Abraham Lincoln gave his first inaugural address in front of this Capitol, the dome was only partially constructed, braced by ropes of steel. He promised he would finish it. He was criticized for spending funds on it during the Civil War. To those critics, he replied, "If the people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign we intend the union shall go on." And it did, and it will. Generations of Americans gave their lives to preserve our republic in this place. Great legislation to protect civil rights and economic security and lead the world was debated and crafted under this dome. Now it falls on all of us, not just the two leaders we are inaugurating today, to take up the torch of our democracy, not as a weapon of political arson, but as an instrument for good. We pledge today never to take our democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible. My friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
Well, I should have known when Senator Klobuchar got involved, at least there'd be a touch of snow up here this morning. Of all the things we'd considered, I don't think snow was on my agenda until I walked out the door a moment ago. But thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and thanks to the other members of the Joint Congressional Committee on the Inauguration as we officially began the 59th inaugural ceremony. I also want to thank the Joint Committee staff and our partners, particularly our security partners, for the way they've dealt with unprecedented circumstances. When I chaired the inauguration 4 years ago, I shared President Reagan's 1981 description of this event as commonplace and miraculous. Commonplace because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Miraculous because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Americans have celebrated this moment during war, during depression, and now during pandemic. Once again, all three branches of our government come together as the Constitution envisions. Once again, we renew our commitment to our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union. That theme for this inauguration, our determined democracy, forging a more perfect union, was announced by the Joint Committee before the election with the belief that the United States can only fulfill its promise and set an example for others if we are always working to be better than we have been. The Constitution established that determined democracy with its first three words, declaring the people as the source of the government. The Articles of Confederation hadn't done that. The Magna Carta hadn't done that. Only the Constitution says the government exists because the people are the source of the reason it exists. They immediately followed those first three words with the words to form a more perfect union. The founders did not say to form a perfect union. They did not claim that in our new country nothing would need to be improved. Fortunately, they understood that always working to be better would be the hallmark of a great democracy. The freedoms we have today, the nation we have today, is not here just because it happened, and they aren't complete. A great democracy working through the successes and failures of our history, striving to be better than it had been. And we are more than we have been, and we are less than we hope to be. The assault on our Capitol at this very place just 2 weeks ago reminds us that a government designed to balance and check itself is both fragile and resilient. During the last year, the pandemic challenged our free and open society and called for extraordinary determination and sacrifice, and still challenges us today. Meeting that challenge head on have been and are healthcare workers, scientists, first responders, essential frontline workers, and so many others we depend on in so many ways. Today we come to this moment, people all over the world as we're here are watching and will watch what we do here. Our government comes together. The Congress and the courts join the transition of executive responsibility. One political party more pleased today and on every inaugural day than the other. But this is not a moment of division, it's a moment of unification. A new administration begins and brings with it a new beginning. And with that, our great national debate goes forward, and a determined democracy will continue to be essential in pursuit of a more perfect union and a better future for all Americans. What a privilege for me to join you today. Thank you. I'm pleased to call to the podium a longtime friend of the president-elect and his family, Father Leo O'Donovan, to lead us in an invocation. Please stand if you are able and remain standing for the national anthem and the pledge to our flag. Thank you, Senator. I'll have to step for me. Thank you.
Gracious and merciful God, at this sacred time we come before you in need, indeed on our knees. But we come still more with hope and with our eyes raised anew to the vision of a more perfect union in our land, a union of all our citizens to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We are a people of many races, creeds, and colors, national backgrounds, cultures, and styles, now far more numerous and on land much vaster than when Archbishop John Carroll wrote his prayer for the inauguration of George Washington 232 years ago. Archbishop Carroll prayed that you, O Creator of all, would assist with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude the President of these United States, that his administration may be conducted in righteousness and be eminently useful to your people. Today we confess our past failures to live according to our vision of equality, inclusion, and freedom for all. Yet we resolutely commit still more now to renewing the vision, to caring for one another in word and deed, especially the least fortunate among us, and so becoming a light for the world. There is a power in each and every one of us that lives by turning to every other one of us, a thrust of the Spirit to cherish and care and stand by others, and above all those most in need. It is called love, and its path is to give ever more of itself. Today, it is called American patriotism, born not of power and privilege, but of care for the common good, with malice toward none and with charity for all. For our new president, we beg of you the wisdom Solomon sought when he knelt before you and prayed for an understanding heart so that I can govern your people and know the difference between right and wrong. We trust in the counsel of the letter of James. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Pope Francis has reminded us how important it is to dream together. By ourselves, he wrote, we risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. Be with us, holy mystery of love, as we dream together. Help us under our new president to reconcile the people of our land, restore our dream and invest it with peace and justice and the joy that is the overflow of love. To the glory of your name, forever. Amen.
Father Donovan, a longtime friend of the Biden family, former president of Georgetown, as we heard.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of our national colors by the Armed Forces Color Guard, the singing of our national anthem, and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ladies and gentlemen, here for the singing of our national anthem, accompanied by the President's own United States Marine Band, please welcome Lady Gaga.
Well, you knew that was coming. You knew Lady Gaga had to have some kind of an amazing outfit.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Say does not
not the most exuberant Star Spangled Banner you may have ever heard. Lady Gaga right there. Big moment there for Lady Gaga. Now it is time for the Pledge of Allegiance. That will be led by Andrea Hall. She's a firefighter from Fulton County, Georgia.
Welcome from the city of South Fulton, Georgia Fire and Rescue Department, President of the International Association of Firefighters, Local 3920, Fire Captain Andrea M. Hall, for the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance.
First African woman in that department's history to be named captain.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For being the first to endorse Joe Biden, and of course Georgia, one of his biggest wins.
What you are all about to be part of, America, is a historic moment of firsts. To administer the oath to our first African American, our first Asian American, and our first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, it is my great privilege to welcome to the inaugural stage the first Latina to ever serve on the Supreme Court of the United States of America, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
All right.
Year 2021. You just heard it. You just saw it. History was made. Kamala Harris taking the oath. It's the first African American, first Asian American, first woman vice president of the United States. Behind her, first African American president, Vice President Pence. Lindsay Davis.
You know, she had her hand on two Bibles. One that belonged to Regina Shelton, a former neighbor and family friend who she's often described as like a second mother. It's also the same Bible that she used during her swearing in as Attorney General and also as Senator.
And now we are going to hear, after Hail Columbia, Jennifer Lopez is going to be singing as well.
Please welcome Jennifer Lopez to perform This Land Is Your Land and America the Beautiful, accompanied by members of the President's own United States Marine Band.
Lady Gaga, Jennifer Lopez, both making resplendent fashion statements today.
For a guy
If that's not resplendent, I don't know what is.
Just proud of how well you've grown up. 10 years ago, you went to take a notice.
Work I never thought I'd
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking down that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land, oh, this land was made for you and me. Oh, this land, this land was made for you and me. You and me. America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood. From sea to shining sea. Una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. Let's get live. This land was made for you and me.
One nation under God with liberty and justice for all. From Jennifer Lopez. Approaching now the moment for President-elect Biden.
That was great. The sun is shining, and Mr. President-elect, this is the first inauguration in the history of America where J-Lo was the warm-up act for Chief Justice Roberts. With that, it is now my distinct honor to introduce the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, John Roberts, to administer the presidential oath to the next President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden.
This is the moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the oath of office, followed by musical honors.
please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
First time the chief played for Joe Biden. Joseph Robinette Biden will be the 46th president of the United States. He was congratulated as Mr. President. He will officially become president in about 9.5 minutes at noon as he's giving the address. So Dr. Joe Biden overcome with emotion in that moment. Who wouldn't be? David Muir, the quest of a lifetime for Joe Biden.
George, this was the ultimate long game. He was elected to the Senate at 29, the youngest. He'll now be sworn in as the oldest president. He has waited and he has dreamed of this moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please
so
be
many
seated.
years. He has told me the president's job is to heal, that the country needs healing, and he told me the words of a president matter.
Dr. Joe Biden there, First Lady of the United States. The bells at Howard University will now ring 49 times before the inaugural address.
My fellow Americans, a moment we have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people, has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken. The oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once in a century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself. A cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make healthcare secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge. And unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay in bed wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand, there are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. This is what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic, those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them for becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, They healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch, but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
The inaugural address of Joseph Robinette Biden, now 46th President of the United States. Powerful, personal, emotional at times, delivered with command. The new president called Americans to empathy and action. He noted those events of 2 weeks ago, the siege of the Capitol, noted that our democracy is fragile, is precious, but it has prevailed.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
As I said, he called Americans to empathy, saying, we can't harden our hearts, we must open our souls, put ourselves in each other's shoes, as his mother taught him.
Garth Brooks to perform Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home. A work as one, united. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Garth Brooks, Amazing Grace. Echoing the new president's calls to unite America. We'll now hear a poem from Amanda Gordon. Not quite social distance there for Garth Brooks. Hugs there. Former President Bill Clinton, former First Lady. Guess he can't help himself. Roy Blunt.
Hard not to be reminded of President Obama's singing that same song at the Mother Emanuel Church. A song that in our culture is as close to both poetry and prayer as you could possibly come. And we're going to finish with those two things. Let me introduce Amanda Gorman, our nation's first ever National Poet Laureate.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it in its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Wow. How's that for a national debut? Most of us will remember where we were when we heard Joe Biden take the oath of office, give his inaugural address. We will all remember when we heard Amanda Gorman speak to the world as America's first National Youth Poet Laureate.
Gorman. Now for our benediction, I'm pleased to introduce Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Wilmington, Delaware, a friend of President Biden for 30 years.
As a nation and people of faith gathered in this historical moment, let us unite in prayer. God, we gather under the beauty of your holiness and the holiness of your beauty. We seek your face, your smile, your warm embrace. We petition you once more in this celebration. We pray for divine favor upon our president, Joseph R. Biden, and our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, and their family. We further ask that you would extend the same favor upon our Vice President, Kamala D. Harris, and our second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and their family. More than ever, they and our nation need you. We need you, for in you we discover our common humanity. In our common humanity, we will seek out the wounded and bind their wounds. We will seek healing for those who are sick and diseased. We will mourn our dead. We will befriend the lonely, the least, and the left out. We will share our abundance with those who are hungry. We will do justly to the oppressed, acknowledge sin, and seek forgiveness, thus grasping reconciliation. In discovering our humanity, we will seek the good in and for all our neighbors. We will love the unlovable, remove the stigma of the so-called untouchables. We will care for our most vulnerable, our children, the elderly, emotionally challenged, and the poor. We will seek rehabilitation beyond correction. We will extend opportunity to those locked out of opportunity. We will make friends of our enemies. We will make friends of our enemies. People, your people, shall no longer raise up weapons against one another. We will rather use our resources for the national good and become a beacon of life and goodwill to the world. And neither shall we learn hatred anymore. We will lie down in peace and not make our neighbors afraid. In you, O God, we discover our humanity. In our humanity, we discover our commonness. Beyond the difference of color, creed, origin, political party, ideology, geography, and personal preferences. We'll become greater stewards of your environment, preserving the land, reaping from it a sustainable harvest, and securing its wonder and miracle-giving power for generations to come. This is our benediction, that from these hallowed grounds, where slaves labored to build this shrine and citadel to liberty and democracy, let us all acknowledge from the indigenous Native American to those who recently received their citizenship, from the African American to those whose foreparents came from Europe in every corner of the globe, from the wealthy to those struggling to make it, from every human being, regardless of their choices, that this is our country. As such, teach us, oh God. As such, teach us, oh God, to live in it, love in it, be healed in it, and reconcile to one another in it, lest we miss kingdom's goal. To your glory, majesty, dominion, and power forever. Hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. In the strong name of our collective faith. Amen.
Please remain standing as the Armed Forces Color Guard retires our national colors.
Echoes of Martin Luther King Jr. there in the benediction, Reverend Dr. Sylvester Beeman, with a prayer and a plea for unity in this country so deeply divided right now. Cecilia Vega, unity, the theme of the day, the theme of this inaugural ceremony, the theme of Joe Biden's presidential campaign, clearly going to be the early theme of his presidency. He said, "My whole soul is in this, bringing America together."
George, this was an inaugural speech aimed at uniting the country, but so much of this was speaking directly to Donald Trump supporters or those who may be doubting Joe Biden's legitimacy. He said, "We won this. This is democracy. You are seeing it in action. It's not about a candidate. Democracy has prevailed." But he also used this moment to attempt to reclaim truth. We just saw an outgoing president who, by counts, issued more than 33 some odd thousand assaults on the truth, mistruths, and this was about taking truth and reclaiming facts, George.
He did do that, and Mary Bruce, you're there at the Capitol today. He did not shy away from mentioning that siege of the Capitol 2 weeks ago. Told the country, told the world, what we saw there will not prevail.
It was a fierce rejection of that kind of hate, of that kind of violence, as he did make this call for unity. And George, I have to say, I've listened to a lot of Joe Biden speeches, and he talks about unity a lot. And what always strikes me is that Biden is not a man of hyperbole. He views unity not as some lofty goal, but as a practical necessity. And you heard that here today. Him saying to tackle this pandemic, to address racial injustice, the country's going to have to come together. Put aside your differences and work towards some common goals. As he said, without unity, there is no progress. And of course, without mentioning President Trump's name, it was a clear rejection of Trumpism. I kept thinking about, that famous line that Donald Trump said, "I alone can fix it." The message today from Joe Biden was, we alone can fix it. If this country has any hope of moving forward, it is going to take everyone coming together. And as Cecilia said, that message to the more than 70 million Americans who voted for President Trump was quite simple and very classic Joe Biden. Him essentially saying, just give me a chance.
Give him a chance. He used that folks a few times. Rachel Scott up there on Capitol Hill, part of that message, I will be a president for all Americans.
That's exactly what he was saying, and it was his main message on the campaign trail. It was the theme of this inauguration here today, and of course, it comes only 2 weeks after we saw what was an insurrection here at the Capitol. Joe Biden saying, this is a new chapter. Let's turn the page. Let's write this. And so much of this was about democracy prevailing at a time when it was tested. Democracy prevailing at a time when we saw rioters here try to overturn the results of an election. And I can't help but think about Vice President Mike Pence there, who was under immense pressure to do something that he constitutionally just could not do. And he resisted. And today he is there for this moment. President Trump is not, George.
He certainly is not. And of course, President Biden did thank his predecessors who were there today. Thank President Carter, who could not make it today. David Muir, that silence, failing to mention President Trump at all, that silence may have been the most eloquent and elegant rebuke possible.
It was profound not to hear. We were told this would be looking forward, but we did not hear him mention his predecessor at all. And there was the other moment, George, where he prayed in silent prayer for the 400,000 American lives lost in just 1 year in this country, and asked that America watching today pray with him. And I'm thinking about the millions of Americans around the country watching this, the 81 million who voted for Joe Biden, the 74 million who voted for Donald Trump. And we know the vast majority of Americans did not like what they saw 2 weeks ago. They were angered by it, frightened by it, saddened by it. And he said, we stand here just days after that mob tried to stop the will of the people. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And he looked around him on the platform to Republicans and Democrats and said, we will get through this together. Look, folks. And he turned to his colleagues. We all understand here. The world is watching. And he asked the American people, we face this all at once. Are we going to step up? He says, I believe we will. And the imagery of what they pulled off today, the 25,000 National Guard troops who secured the Capitol, the green zone that we talk about in Iraq and elsewhere, in the Capitol, to pull this off, to send a message not only to America but to the world that democracy prevails, fragile democracy, but on this very important day, it prevails.
As we see Kamala Harris, the new Vice President of the United States, her husband Doug Emhoff. The President, Lindsey Davis, confronted so many crises in that inaugural speech, talked about the constant struggle in America, the struggle that is as long as our republic, as old as our republic, between our ideals and the ugly reality of racism and nativism.
Right, and he also said the same words that Abraham Lincoln said in his first inaugural speech when he talked about making that appeal to the better angels of our nature. You know, I think I have to just talk about 22-year-old Amanda Gorman just for a moment, because that was more than a poem, that was preaching. And it was preaching born out of wisdom, passion, and dare I say pain. You know, her poem was entitled The Hill We Climb. And of course, this was not so much about Capitol Hill as much as it was the uphill battle that's been faced by so many Americans. And George, I just have to say, it has been a long time coming for Black and brown Americans. And, you know, President Joe Biden has long talked about, fighting for the soul of America. And he referenced that today. And he said, my whole soul is in this. And I think that Amanda, what she did was she revealed a bit of that soul for us in her poem. I do think that President Biden struck the right tone. The question now is, will it resonate for Americans? And just one additional point, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris has issued her first tweet on her official vice presidential Twitter, ready to serve.
She is ready to serve. She is serving now as Vice President of the United States. John Carl, vintage Joe Biden in other ways as well, referencing his mother, talking about how we all have to open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. We've talked about this before. We talked about it during the campaign. His empathy has been his core, the core value that he's always expressed. He's calling on all Americans to share it.
It's what's defined him. It's what's defined him since he first came into the Senate after the tragic deaths of his wife and his child. I mean, I thought just for a moment, George, Amanda Gorman again. I think it was a memorable speech for Joe Biden. An important speech, the most important speech of his life. I think we will also remember Amanda Gorman. And the line that struck out to me was, even as we hurt, we hope. And the other thing, sandwiched in between, on the other side of Biden's speech, his Reverend Beeman saying, we must make friends of our enemies. We must make friends of our enemies, which defined the challenge that Biden takes on right now. And the line in Biden's speech that stood out to me was when he said, there is truth and there are lies It's such a simple line, George. It is a platitude in any other context. But where we are now, the divisions that we face, we must make friends of our enemies. The challenge in doing that is that we have not simply enemies in a political context, but we have divided camps that do not accept the same definition of what is true and what is a lie. The people that stormed that Capitol in the name of a lie that was perpetrated and expanded on and pushed at every point by Biden's predecessor. So when he came out and said that line, again, that simple line, there is truth and there are lies. If he can convince us, if he can convince Americans of that once again, he'll go a long way to accomplishing what he needs to accomplish.
That would be a monumental victory for Joe Biden as 46th president of the United States. Mark Updegrove, presidential historian. We must not be enemies. We must not make friends of our enemies, as John Carlos just talked about. Echoes of Abe Lincoln right there.
Echoes Lincoln on the eve of Civil War in 1861, the worst domestic crisis that we have ever faced as a nation. We, of course, faced one 2 weeks ago, George. But I think what President Biden said at the top of his speech most resonated with me, which is, this is democracy's day. Democracy has prevailed, despite what we saw from President Trump, his trying to sabotage this election, calling on insurrectionists to seize the Capitol, to try to overturn the result, to try to overthrow our country. Democracy triumphed. This today was a triumph of democracy.
Martha Raddatz, thank you. Mark, that was clearly the message that the new president had for the world as well. America has been tested, but we have come out stronger.
Exactly the message he was portraying. We will repair our alliances, lead not by power, but the power of our example and our leadership. A strong message to the world. And of course, there are congratulations coming in from all over the world, as would be expected. Look, the world has to deal with whoever is president. And I know foreign leaders around the world during the Trump administration were just holding their breath. I also look, and I'm looking there at Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, who was among the crowd there today. He will remain chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but he had a very tough balancing act during this period. I know there's probably a sigh of relief over at the Pentagon that Iran didn't act up in the last couple of weeks, because there were certainly plans to respond to any attack from Iran. Mark Milley, of course, was caught up in the politics of Donald Trump, making that walk with him through Lafayette Park when they were going after peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters. I know Milley peeled away from the crowd there, but apologized for that, knew that was wrong, and then carried on and with his advice to the president. Also, all the military up there, George. I was looking at the Marine when he escorted Lady Gaga, as we see there still down, and thinking, boy, that's got to make his day. Probably never imagined that he would be escorting Lady Gaga. Probably as surprised as we all were with your descriptions of the outfits, George. We like that a lot.
There
Okay,
we see the
very good.
Speaker of the House. Chairman, I have to say, just watching those last few moments as Martha was talking, how refreshing to see presidents, former presidents, just sitting up there on the steps of the Capitol under siege 2 weeks ago, just chatting.
A return to some kind of normalcy. Look, those presidents did not agree with each other. They had their disagreements. In some ways, George Bush was elected to refute the presidency of Bill Clinton, and certainly Barack Obama to refute the presidency of George W. Bush. But in keeping with our tradition, there they are. And that's really what we heard, I think, in this inaugural address, plain spoken. And although he didn't put it this way, I think Joe Biden was diagnosing the problem that is causing the disunity. He said our real foes are anger and resentment and hatred, and that without unity, there's no peace, only bitterness and fury, no progress, only exhausting outrage. That worst version of ourselves that everybody seems to give themselves permission to be on, on social media. And it's really a problem of national character. Benjamin Franklin said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. And by virtue, he meant those common sense, common decency attributes that Joe Biden embodies and lives by. And I think that's the note he tried to strike in his speech. If it can help at all, it was probably the right note.
Barack Obama is a happy man today. You can definitely see that right there. A lot of fist bumps, a lot of elbow bumps. Byron, I was going to ask you about Biden's speech, but you probably want to talk about Amanda Gorman.
Right? I mean, she was phenomenal, George. And watching this moment, today's inauguration felt more like a church service, right? I mean, and we see there that, like after a good sermon, the congregation doesn't want to go home, right? People are still hugging, shaking hands. And I thought from Joe Biden today, certainly he was commander-in-chief, but he was also papa-in-chief. He gave a speech to comfort the nation. He said, in part, to those who did not vote for me, if you still disagree, so be it. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. So it was a unifying speech. And George, if you think about it, it's a 4.5-hour drive from Scranton, Pennsylvania, where Biden's from, to the White House in Washington. It took Joe Biden 78 years from the shy side of blue collar to become the most powerful person on earth. That remains only possible in America. We are not a perfect nation, as he reminded us today, but the nation, the promise of America, remains today like no other on earth. And I think Joe Biden, this ceremony, even the presence of Mike Pence today, reminds us what is so unique about our nation.
Christy, thank you, Byron. Did Joe Biden meet the moment?
Yeah, I think he did. I think he gave the speech he needed to give. And but again, today is today. And then tomorrow work starts. And I think for all of us, whether it was Rahm as mayor or me as governor, you know, the day you get sworn in is an amazing day, and you speak to your highest aspirations. And then the next day, everybody shows up to work. And then you got to decide, how are you going to execute on the aspirations that you spoke? And that's the great challenge that faces the president and faces everyone. I would say that I think that President Trump missed a moment at the very beginning of his presidency. He could have brought people together behind an infrastructure package that the country desperately needed, and gotten Republican and Democratic votes for it. I hope that President Biden puts that up pretty early on to show that he can make the aspirations that he spoke about today a reality of governing. If he does that, it will make him a more powerful president.
The hard work is going to begin immediately. COVID front and center, his COVID relief bill, as we see. The new Vice President of the United States saying farewell to the man who was Vice President of the United States for the last 4 years, Mike Pence and Karen Pence. He served in the House as well. Now, his first walk down those Capitol steps as a former Vice President of the United States. Rahm Emanuel, your thoughts on the speech?
I'd make 2 quick points. These days are usually self-asserting about democracy and the American story. I think when you look at the whole day's event, it's almost becoming self-reassuring about America's story and its democracy. We have to actually convince ourselves, given what happened 2 weeks ago. The second is, the American motto is out of many one. And underneath all of this is a basic point that after the last 4 years, we deviated from that motto. And I think when you really strip back, what Joe Biden was talking about was reasserting that motto as our North Star. The poem, which we all said, I mean, I think she stole the day, and I think we're going to hear a lot. That's the first we've heard it, not the last we've heard of Ms. Gorman. But that motto is our North Star. And I think Joe Biden, in his own biography, but also his words, was reminding all of us that out of many is one, and that is the project of America, and that's the project of a president who's unique in America to lead us towards that, no matter how many different ways the twists and turns it has. And I think that today he's started his presidency on a step forward, but it was a big step given the last 4 years.
Sarah Fagan delivered with such conviction.
Such conviction. And I agree so much with Byron that there is so much religion infused in this speech and unity. I don't remember an inaugural where references to God were so prevalent. And in some ways, I don't know that the Biden team thought of it this way, but it was a unique way to reach out to Trump's America. If you look at evangelical Christians, they overwhelmingly supported the president. If you look at church attendance in this country, the more likely you attend church more than once, huge numbers of those individuals supported the Republicans. That was a way for him to reach out without getting into politics.
Yvette?
A beautiful day, a beautiful set of speeches, lots of great words. I do want to echo that young woman, Amanda Gorman, who just reminds us America's best kept secret. Black women are magic. We are brilliant. We are special. We are beautiful. We are amazing. And she is going to go down in history. I think she did steal the day. You know, I want to add a different perspective because I always do. There was one place where I wanted him to kind of step out a little more. And that was when he talked about being the president for everyone. And if you are not okay with that, okay, but I'm still going to serve you. I think back to John F. Kennedy, who said, ask not what your country will do for you, but what you will do for your country. And I think it's an important thing for him to say. Unity requires you to step up and do something too. The folks who came and stormed the Capitol 2 weeks ago, disenfranchised, feeling left out, guess what? A lot of us have felt that way. And we continue to show up and we fight for this country that is not perfect, that has not served us. And I wanted him to say, re-engage. You need to be a part of the solution. And I hope we see that coming out. Don't let these folks off the hook. We need them to be a part of the solution. He's not going to come to them and feed them from his hand. They have to come to the table. They have to be prepared to sacrifice and fight for the unity that they require and that they expect.
I think it was a call for all Americans to come together on that score, but perhaps not as direct as you would have liked to have heard, but he was clear calling Americans to engage again, as we saw. And as we see these pictures now from the Capitol, we see actually, no, I'm not sure that's President Obama again, so I'm not going to say it. But I do want to go to Rachel Scott. You were there for those moments where Vice President Kamala Harris was saying goodbye to Mike Pence.
I was, George, and I looked up on those steps and I thought about 232 years. 232 years in our nation's history where we have seen men stand on those steps. 48 vice presidents, now today the nation getting their first woman of color, of Black and Indian